Okay, let's get started. First of all, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining today. My name is Ronnie, and I'm the CEO here at Blue Eye Webtest, and we're going to be talking a bit about automating regression testing today. And I have some real nice things to show you. So first, we're just going to run through a couple of slides, and then in about 2 minutes from now, we're going to head on into Blue Eye Webtest and start creating our first automated tests. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk a bit about getting started with automated regression testing, what you need to be aware of, and where to begin. We're also going to talk about structuring your test cases, so in a meaningful manner that will make it easier for yourself to maintain them later. In general, we're also going to talk about improving maintainability and reusability of your test cases, and especially reusing test cases is something that can really save you a lot of time. We're also going to talk about migrating broken tests. So as your website changes, sometimes tests will break as well, and you need to go back and correct them. So we're going to talk about what you can do to make that easier and basically save a lot of time. As we go, we're going to talk about some common pitfalls and what you can do to avoid them. In the examples and the demos I've prepared for you for the next 30 minutes, you will notice that I'm going to try to use examples that will lead us into some of the common issues or challenges that there are with automating testing. So anyone can make it seem easy, but I'm really going to try to show you guys some of the problems that you may run into, and hopefully make it easier on you when you meet them yourself. So you can get a good start and be successful in your automated regression testing. So as you get ready for doing your own automated tests, the first thing you need to do is define your goals. What is it that you want to achieve, and what are your expectations of your automated tests? And depending on what your goals are, there will be different ways of testing, and certainly testing in different levels of details. Once you've defined your goals, you need to pick the right tool for the job. And obviously, I'm going to highly recommend you to give Blue Eye Webtest a try. But there are several great tools out there, and I always encourage everyone to explore on their own. If you're a developer who loves to write lots of code and maintain long scripts, then Blue Eye Webtest is probably not for you. But as you'll see in a minute, in Blue Eye Webtest, we try to focus on keeping everything as simple as possible and make it as easy as possible to work with. There are great tools out there. If you've done any previous work with automated testing, you've probably heard of tools like Selenium, a very popular tool, a great framework for doing browser automation. And actually, Blue Eye Webtest is built on top of Selenium, so most of the browser communication going on below the surface is actually handled by the Selenium web drivers. It's also important to incorporate test development as a natural part of your release planning, and especially accounting for the time that is needed to maintain your tests. Once you start doing automated tests, it's really important that you do what you need to do to keep them up to date. And if it's not a part of your plan, you are going to end up disabling or deleting tests simply because they don't work anymore after some change to the website. And over time, your tests will just continue to devaluate. So do make sure to include the time that is needed to maintain your tests as a release plan. When you do create your test, it's really important to have a structured approach and try to think ahead. If there are certain features on your website that changes frequently, or you know that there's a big change coming up soon, make sure to make decisions as early as possible to make it easier on yourself when they do change. And I'm going to show you what that could be. As you're creating tests, it's really important to create solid tests and avoid to have any single point of failures. What does that mean? That means, let's say you have a website that has a backend administration area where you need to be logged in as an administrator. Say there's 100 different features in there. You could have 100 different test cases, each of them testing each their feature inside this backend administration area. Then in a month from now, someone decides to change the login page of your website, and all of a sudden you're going to end up with 100 tests that fails, and you need to go through every single one of them to fix them. So that's definitely something we want to avoid, and I'm going to show you how we can do that by reusing certain parts of our tests. Great, so let me just share my screen here, and we'll head on into Blue Eye Webtest and create our first tests. Great. So first we're going to talk a little bit about structuring your tests. So this is Blue Eye Webtest, the main window. That's the first thing you'll see if you download Blue Eye Webtest, if you haven't already. Blue Eye Webtest basically consists of 3 different tools. There's the test case part of it, which is what we're going to be talking about today. and there are also 2 automated scanners which you can use for validating all the links and make sure you don't have any missing images and optimize your search engine optimization. So we're not going to talk about these 2 today. We're going to focus on the regression testing. When you organize your test cases, it's really important to categorize them and just make it easier for yourself. So I like to kind of have the root category be the name of the website I'm going to test. So first we're going to try testing bluewebtest.com. Underneath that, we may have different areas of the website. So this is a fairly simple website, basically just some basic content. So let's say we want to test the navigation. And we could have other areas like checkout flow or download, basically all the different areas. So these are some of the things you need to think about before you get into automated testing, or at least as the very first step. Sit down and have a look at your own website. What kind of areas do we have? Make sure to create all these categories just so you're never in any doubt on where I should place a new test. Having this categorization allows you to run all tests in just a branch of your test, or if a test fails, you always know exactly where it is. If you have a test failing that says add to basket failed, then you probably know it's in the catalog or checkout area. So for this first test, I'm gonna just bring in a browser here. We have the Blue Eye website, and we're gonna just test that our top navigation here works as it should. So let's try to automate that. I'm gonna right click on the navigation category and say create new test case. This will open up the test case editor, and basically what you see on the screen right now is the only thing you need to worry about most of the time. So here in the center we have the web browser. Anything we do inside this web browser will be recorded and added to the timeline near the bottom here, as long as we have this recorder checkbox enabled. In the left hand side we have a collection of tools that you can use to interact with the browser, but most of the time the recorder will do the job for you. So basically if I go navigate to the website, you'll see the recorder automatically registered that we navigated to a new page and inserted a navigate tool and configured the URL that we entered. So most of the time you don't need to worry about these tools apart from the assert tools, but we'll get back to them in a second. So for this first test, let's just click a few of these links. And notice as I go, everything is being added to the timeline with a small thumbnail, just so to make it easier for ourselves to see each step. And it will also try to generate a meaningful display name for each step. This is going to be a very simple test. We'll create some more advanced one in a second, but let's just try running this test for now. Click run to test it. Navigates and clicks all the buttons, and everything worked. So had any of these errors or any of these pages thrown an error when we tried to load it, of course the test would have failed. So actually we can go ahead and save this test now and say test the top navigation. If we want to do something a little bit more advanced, let's use some of these assert tools, because in order for a test to really bring any value, you need to set up your expectations. And this is an exercise that you need to do when you're starting automating your test as a human being. When you do a test manually, your eyes will automatically look at the page and you already have an expectations of what you're going to see. You don't expect to get a yellow error message. You expect to see some content. But when you're automating, the tool that you're automating with doesn't necessarily know what you're expecting. So that's what we need to tell it. So let's try navigating to, for instance, the contact page. And we can see on this page we have access a link to the frequently asked questions section. So let's just make sure that we have that. I accidentally clicked it there, so let's just delete those again. Let's verify that we have this link on this page. So what I can do is I can assert a text field, or I can just assert that text is anywhere on the page. For now I'm just going to try this feature. It says assert text on page. And now Blue Eye Webtest will allow me just to click the field that I want to assert. So if I click here, it's automatically going to suggest that I want to make sure that my page contains this FAQ section. Let's hit save. Let's try running it. And we see we didn't get an error. If this had been removed, the Blue Eye website is built on top of Umbraco CMS, so I can actually just quickly edit the page. Let's say we call this FAQ page instead. Now if we run this test again, it's gonna fail until I was expecting to find something called the FAQ section. I didn't find it, so the test failed. So in this case, we're actually asserting that we have this link. So let's say we were actually just wanting to redirect to this link instead. So instead of asserting, we want to actually click it and go to this page. Now some marketing guy come in a week later and doesn't like the naming page. He wanted to be called section instead. Now we could potentially have a problem with our test. Even though we're not asserting anything, we're actually navigating to a link that's now no longer called the same. Let's try running it, see what happens. You'll see it just hanging there for a second, looking for the button to click, and it says there was no button or links found on this page that had a text that was equal to an FAQ page. So this is part of the broken tests. So of course content changed all the time, and therefore you can use different identification modes for identifying your elements in the web page. This particular element was identified using the text, and we have various other options which I'm going to go through in just a second. Let's say that we had a test case relying on this field to be here, and we wanted to select it by name, and someone comes by and changes it. Of course, we have to go and fix our test. So when we run this test from the main interface, let's just save it quickly. Can navigate to FAQ page from a contact page. And make sure to use naming. That will make it easy for yourself to know exactly what this test case does. So now we have two new test cases. If we run this test case in, let's just test it for now in Internet Explorer. We can run the same test case in multiple browsers, and we can also run them simultaneously. So we can see this test case actually failed, and it will tell us that there were no buttons with this text on the page. So what we need to do to fix it, of course, is we can go in here, edit it, and we can just run the test and wait for it to fail. And as soon as it fails, we will see which step it failed at, and we can just make the corrections ourselves. Or we can use this migrate function. So the migrate function basically runs our test, and as soon as it's about to fail, it will try to automatically recover. Because again, small changes are coming quite often to websites, depending on what kind of website you have. Let's try pressing the migrate button. It's going to run the test, came to this page, and this is where we got the error before. Right now it's scanning the page, trying to figure out which was the right link, and it found it and said the migration is complete. Now if I run my test case, the migrator have automatically updated my test, and I can just save it, and now the test will succeed. Let's just try running it in all browsers at the same time. And we got a nice check mark here. Great. So that's the migrator. And I'm not going to go into too much technical details, but the way it works is that at the time when you create your test, it's going to record a lot of additional information about all the elements on the page. So if the element changes, it can recognize an element even though it has changed. It will know that, okay, it was just the text that was changed for this same element. So the migrator assumes it's probably still this element you want. And this can also be handy if you have let's say you're clicking a link up here and it was moved to the bottom left instead, or yeah, basically whatever, any kind of change, as long as it's still on the same page and it's somewhat similar, the migrator will most of the time be able to automatically migrate your test, and that can save a lot of time, especially if you have a lot of tests and you've made a change to like a master page, which means a part of the page which is present in all single pages on your website. So no matter what URL you're in, you always see something in the top and the bottom of your web page. If you make a change there, you could potentially have a lot of tests failing. So it could really save a lot of time to do these automated migrations. So let's just quickly talk a bit more about identifiers. So for this test, let's just run it to this part. Before we use the text part of this link to identify it, when you're clicking an element, you can always right-click in the timeline and select Edit, and it will show you how to identify this element. And for instance, when I clicked the navigation tab in the top navigation here, it was using the text contact to identify it. I could also have chosen to use the ID of the element. These are usually the best way to go, but not all elements have IDs, therefore we cannot use them. So how do Blue Eye Webtest figure out which identifier to use? We have something called identifier priority up here in the top. If you click it, you'll see the different supported identifiers in Blue Eye Webtest, and the priority basically is from the top going to the bottom. So if there's an ID on the element, it will use that. If there's a name, it will check if the name is unique in the entire page. If it is, it will use that. So you can again change the order of things here. So when I clicked the contact, it didn't have an ID, it didn't have a name, it did have a text. So Blue Eye Webtest went ahead and scanned all other elements on the web page and made sure there were no other elements with the same text. If that was the case, it used that. So again, identifiers is not usually something you have to worry about. Usually the default settings here will suit most websites. But let's say you do have a certain feature, and that could be like a today's news box on the front page of your website, and you have an automated test and you wanted to go to your website and click that first news or that today's news box. If you use the text and let's say your news had your today's news have a headline and you click that headline, then obviously tomorrow the text is going to be changed and the test will be broken. So probably using text is not the best option for that kind of element. So that's one of the challenges when you do automated testing, thinking about how do we identify our elements. Most of the time you don't have to, and if you don't, you'll just notice tomorrow your test failed for the today's news, and you'll just go check why did it fail. Okay, so maybe I should just select a different selector or select a different identification mode. And I can afterwards, I have this contact here, let's say edit and say, okay, it suggested that we use text. I don't want to use text. I want to use XPath instead, which basically just means what is the route or the path to this element. It will have stored all these selectors as well, so we can always change this later. So that's basically identifiers. If you guys have any questions as we go, please just either speak up or just write it in the instant messaging chat, and I will just answer them as we go. Let's, I think for the next demo, let's head on to an e-commerce website that has a bit more functionality to test, a bit more logic. So we're gonna head over to a site called trollbreeze.com, which sells these kind of glass beads. Let's say we wanted to test adding stuff to the basket. So I navigate to the URL, I click choose a category, and I say, okay, I want to have one of these tiger eyes. Let's add it to the basket. Now my test is basically done. I added something to the basket, but again, we want to insert our expectations. So let's just head over to the basket page and say we want to make sure that we really do have this element on the web page. So let's say, oh, I just accidentally clicked. Let me remove that. So assert text on page. We're going to assert that we have tiger eye. And whenever I do asserts, I can specify if I want this to result in an error or as a warning in case it fails. So the difference is that if it's an error, the test will stop as soon as it fails, and it will just write to the report that this test failed because of whatever it can figure out based on the assert statement. If it's a warning, it's gonna still write the warning to the report, but the test will continue afterwards. Now we have a test that navigates the web page, goes to category, adds something to the basket, goes to the basket page, and checks that the element is actually there. So now we have a really strong test here. Let's just try running it, see if it works. And it did. We could also say that maybe we wanted to, I'm just going to click here so I can insert new elements before it. Let's say we wanted to update the quantity to 4 and hit update. Again, notice how the recorder will automatically insert tools that I need. So when I change the text value of a field, it will automatically insert a set text field tool. So what I would do now is, after updating the quantity, what I would want to do is check that the quantity is actually 4 now. There could be a problem somewhere in the website that means when you update the quantity, it isn't being saved or something. So let's say assert text field. Assert text field allows me to select a specific field that I want to assert the value inside. Again, I'm just going to click this field, and it's going to suggest to me that I use the ID because it had one, which is perfect, and it suggests that we check that it's equal to 4, which is exactly what we want. So let's just go ahead and save that, and let's try running our test again. And we have 4 in our basket. So that's good. Now, if we hadn't updated the quantity, but just added one of them, and then went to the basket page, we would have 1 tiger eye in our basket. If we repeated the same test, all of a sudden we would have 2, because we didn't clear the one from the last time. So here's another challenge when you do automated testing. You may not always be in the same context when you're executing a test as you were when you created it. And this can introduce a lot of problems. So in this specific test, I'll probably just, as soon as I'm done, I'll just hit clear basket and make it part of my test to clear the basket again. And now, no matter how many times I run this test, I will never run into any kind of context issues. It's always going to be the same. There are ways to set up conditions. So based on information in the current context, you can have different conditions. But again, you shouldn't use them unless you really have to. And I'll show you an example in a second where it's a really good idea to use conditions. But just the context is really something to be aware of, because it's not something we usually think about. Because if we log into the website manually and add something to the basket and we see there's 2 of them, we can quite easily figure out it's because I had one already. But again, the test won't do that. It will only do what we tell it to do. So let's try another example where we actually do need to use conditions. Let's say that I'm going to navigate again to the Toby's website and I want to log in. So I just created an account previously. So I'm just going to log in as myself here. Demo 123. And now you have my secret password. Let's hit go. And we're logged in. So now we're testing the login functionality of this website. Again, after we click go, we want to assert that we were actually logged in. So as a human being, we can quite easily see that it says, hi, Ronnie Belly, log out. So we know, okay, we're logged in. We have to tell our test case that this is what you need to look for. So let's just assert that we have certain text on the page. Let's just assume that it has to say log out. If it says log out, we know that we've been logged in. Let's try running it. And we run into context issues. Right now the test is going to fail because it's trying to set this field and it couldn't set the field because it's not there, because we're already logged in. And even as I go back and forth, if I just disable the recorder for a second, no matter what I do now, I will always remain logged in until I close the browser and open it again. So if you have other tests that also has to log in, all these tests will fail if they run after this test. So this is kind of one of these context issues you have. So one way of dealing with that is you could always log out before logging in. That's one way. But then again, it would fail if you weren't already logged in. So what you can do is have a condition. So let's say immediately after navigating, to the web page, I want to hit the logout button. So let me just enable the recorder and hit logout. So now this test will still fail because the first thing it does is logging out. So let me just execute this test case starting from this step. So we actually just asking it to log in again. So I can right click on a specific step in the timeline and say I want to run just this step or starting from this step. So we're gonna choose starting from this step, which should log us back in. Okay, apparently it's not the same. Let's just try again. And there we go. Now if I execute this test, it is gonna succeed because it can log out first. So we want to set a condition on this logout. So we only want it to log out if you're already logged in. So what I can do is I can right click on this tool and I can say set condition. And what kind of condition do I need? I need to assert that I'm logged in. So let's just look for the logout text up here, just like we did before. So I just want to make sure that it says logout. And now you'll see it becomes kind of reddish in the top left corner, and we get this kind of triangle here that indicates to us that this tool has a condition. So if we execute this, it's going to find that it says logout. Hopefully. I think let me just get this straight. I must have made a mistake here. I'm going to hit logout. I'm going to log back in. And I'm going to go back to the page I was at when I clicked logout. And the way I can do that is right click a step and say navigate to the URL where this step was inserted, or you can just double click it. This will make sure that everything is the same because again the context is different. Even though this button was available on multiple different pages, other elements on the page can influence the way it's being selected by the identifier. So therefore again context is really important, not only when you execute your tests but also when you're developing them. So again, let's try to set a condition on this tool. And we want to make sure that it says logout. And now let's try running the test again. And we see it logged out for us, and it is going to log back in. Now, as I execute this test one more time, we should see that it just bypasses this logout step because the condition is not being met. Well, actually it is right now. Let's just log out manually, disable the recorder, hit logout, and then we're going to try to run it. So if it didn't have the condition, it should fail here. And we see it just skip that step because yeah, the condition wasn't being met. So that's how you can have kind of conditional steps in your test case. Having conditions do make things more complex, so you should only use them when you really have to. You could also kind of turn this around and said I'm only going to log in if I'm not already logged in. So that will probably perform better as well. Let's see. Reuse. When you develop your test cases, it's really important to consider reuse of the same test because, as I mentioned during the introduction, that if you have login as part of every single test case, your test becomes very fragile, and as soon as your login feature changes, you're going to have a complete test suite of broken tests, basically. So let's see how we can kind of reuse this test because logging in seems like something we would do in a lot of different places. So let's save this test, and we're gonna just create a new category called I'm gonna call it account. I'm gonna say login as RPA. Save. And now we have a new test here, and if I run this test, it will be able to log into all the different browsers, and we got a nice check mark here. So let's say I was to create a new test now, which depends on me being logged in. Let's say I wanted to create a test that would check that the email subscriptions work just fine. The first thing again I would need to do is go to the website and log in. but I'm already doing that inside the login case, so let's just reuse that instead. So basically the first thing we're going to do is say test cases. I want to run an existing test case, and I want to execute the one called login as RBA. Now I have a single step here, which will basically execute all the steps from the login test case. So let's just try executing this. And we got logged in. So instead of kind of doing it all one more time, doing over and over again, we can just reuse the functionality from this test case. And actually we can make this even simpler on ourselves, because we're probably going to use this in a lot of tests. And even though it was quite easy, click here, I can, if I want to, filter by category and then select the test I want to execute and save it. Fairly easy, but we can make it even easier. We can right click this and say save as pre-configured. Basically what that does is the exact same thing as clicking this tool and entering the information you need and hitting save. Here we're basically just creating a new button that has this tool already configured. So let's save it, and we're just going to call it login as RBA. Save it, and now we get a new button up here on the pre-configured. So if I have a completely new test case and I hit login as RBA, it's already inserting the step for me. And if I choose to edit this step, I'll see it's still just the run existing test case that points to login as RBA. So this is a really convenient way of kind of creating your own tools in this toolbox out here. This could also be things like navigate to a website. It could be logging in as someone. Again, any kind of thing that you do over and over again, it makes sense to create a pre-configured tool for it. If let me just save this test, and we're just gonna call it. For now, we're just gonna call it test login as RBA, because that's pretty much all this tool does. Now let's pretend that the login page changed and login no longer works, which means that this test login as RBA would fail. All we would have to do is go back to the original test case that's called login as RBA, make the required changes, save it, and as we go back to all the other tests that use it, it's automatically going to work. So it's not going to copy the test, it's going to reference it. So it's actually just executing that other test, it's not copying it into it. So if you need to change the way your login works, you can just go back and change the login test, and all the other tests depending on it will start working again. That is pretty much the most important things to consider when you're doing automated testing. So some of the things I've shown you guys today are some of the more complex things and some of the challenges that you will experience. For the most part, when you do a test, it's going to be even easier. For instance, just navigating, click the links you want to go to, everything will just be recorded. If you have a text entry field, again, everything is just being recorded and actually real time. You'll notice how the Blue Eye Webtest and the browser actually connects. So if I go and change this field as well, it will actually change it inside the browser. So they become completely connected. So most part of the time, you don't have to think about how you do the test. Just test it manually as you would. But do consider not getting too many steps in a test case, because the longer it becomes, the harder it becomes to maintain it. I've seen many people doing automated tests where they have a single or just a few test cases that will basically go through your entire website, and that's fine if all you need is just to be informed if something fails. It will do that for you, but it will take a long time to maintain such tests, because when it fails, then you need to go in here and scroll through the 1,000 of steps and find the one failing and edit it and save it again. It's really a lot better to kind of keep your tests as small as possible and make them very specific and make sure that the naming matches exactly what they do. For instance, test, I can log in as administrator. Test, I can add to basket. Update quantity of item in basket. tests like that are usually easier to maintain and a lot easier to reuse as well. So if you have any other tests relying on them, such as the login, you can reuse them. Do you guys have any questions related to Blue Eye Webtest or regression testing in general? Yeah, sure. So reporting here, what that does is basically just, let's say I have these two tests right here. If I say I want to run this category in Internet Explorer, it's going to run all the tests here. And every time I run my tests, it's going to create a report for me. So in just a second, we have one more very simple report. It executed login as RBA, it executed test login as RBA, and both of them was successful in Internet Explorer. It will create a test report every single time I run a test, and these are just basic HTML files that are stored on your hard drive, so you can easily copy them into an email and pass them on to someone else. So let's try to introduce an error instead. Let's say I can navigate to frequently asked question page. Again, I just double click this tool, which is going to take me straight to the page where I inserted this tab. Let's right click, edit, and say click FAQ section 2. Just we want this to fail. You're going to save. Yeah, Blue Eye Webtest is going to warn us here and telling us that the identifier doesn't seem valid, so it's probably going to fail. That's okay. Let's save it. And let's just run everything, and let's just do it in all the browsers at the same time. So now it's going to run all the tests that we created today, and it's going to run them in all browsers. So we can see it finished testing the top navigation. Now it's at the contact page. Oh, we can see it failed. We have one successful, one failed so far. If a test fails in just a single browser, it counts as a fail. I will be able to see inside the report if it worked on some of them. You see, we actually just got an error here. So this is apparently an error on the the web page. So this one actually failed as well. So let's check our report. And we can see now that Internet Explorer failed to click FAQ page. It couldn't find any button or links that had that text. And same goes for Firefox and Chrome. For the test login as RBA, it was successful in IE. It failed in Firefox because it couldn't find find this text, of course, because the entire web page failed. And everything else was successful. It would all, regardless of the order you execute these tests, it's always gonna place the all errors on the top, then warnings, and then all the successful test cases at the bottom. Yes, so let's say you have a test suite of you have a bunch of tests that you can execute, and you have one or two that fails. It could be due to content that has changed. This is when you would actually go through the tree structure here and pick the ones that failed. Right click, edit, and if you want to, you can hit play and just see for yourself where it does fail. And if you have a very long test, you might then want to go through it manually, and that again is where you can use the the migrate button to do it for you. So anybody have any other questions? No. If you think of any questions later, or if you decide to give Blue Eye Webtest a try, you're always welcome to send me an email. I'm happy to help you out. Let me just bring it up here, so you should see my contact information here. You can always just send me an email if you have any comments or questions about Blue Eye Webtest or about this webinar. So again, thank you very much for joining today, and I wish you all the best of luck with your regression testing, and have a great day.